So, I just kind of wanted to make this video because I just wanted to start getting into more video style journaling. And also, it makes it easier for me to just like talk things out loud and just like document my thought process and stuff like that. And I just wanted to, dive deep more into, just like healing and stuff like and things of that nature. And I'm probably gonna stutter a lot in this video. And I think I don't even know where to start, but I think the biggest thing for me was in a relationship, is healing, of course, and like getting at when you're out of a relationship, it's a very long and tedious process. And for me in particularly, people usually say that like, you shouldn't really be in a relationship unless you love yourself. And like, you shouldn't use a relationship to fill in that void. But I kind of just want to talk about my personal experience and also just like share some advice and things like that. And I have some notes on my phone that I might read and think and stuff. But I feel like the difficult thing for me was loving myself. And what has helped me was that like uh, what helped me was just like talking to friends and like getting their advice. And also like I'm not gonna even lie, like I would get like some inspirational like TikToks and like sad TikToks that were like, even though like they weren't necessarily good, it did help with I guess along the process. And I think the biggest thing that was particularly challenging was just like loving myself after a breakup because I necessarily relied on another person to fill in that deep emotional void. And typically, that pain often makes us feel like, unworthy and rejected. And, I feel like it made me realize, there's more complex emotional struggle deep down within myself that is deeply tied to our relationships within ourselves and like in our sense of identity. And typically for me, like that void, you know, is typically filled when we're in a relationship. And we often find ourselves placing a lot of value and validation and affection when that we receive within our partner. And I wouldn't think that's necessarily wrong, but the issue comes when we solely rely on that other person to validate ourselves as a whole. And for me, we might use that other person to like fill in the void inside of us, and that usually stems from a lot of things, insecurity in my case, loneliness and or other emotional stuff. And when typically when a relationship ends, we have to like face those unresolved emotional wounds that happen within ourselves. And we have to just like face that harsh reality that the external validation that we have is now gone. And suddenly that void we've been trying to avoid all these times is coming back and it's painfully there again. And, sometimes we often feel like empty again and lost and even shameful, since we're never going to be who we are without that person. And I was having a conversation about my friend, and typically, I keep using the word typically a lot, but I feel like um, a big thing for me was just like loving myself, and it was difficult for me to like really love myself. And I was having a conversation with a friend, And he was talking about shame and how shame is the reason why it's difficult for us to really love ourselves because shame plays this role where uh, we believe that we're not enough, and like we might question ourselves why the relationship ended, and we might blame ourselves for certain things. And we often tell like this narrative uh within ourselves that like it's like I wasn't good enough, or like I failed in this relationship, and it convinces us that there's something wrong with who we are, rather than just being emotional with to specific circumstances of certain things. And this sense of shame, it makes it harder to rebuild a healthy sense of self-worth, and it makes us believe that our value was conditional, and we need someone else's approval or affection, which is necessarily temporary, and it's fragile. And rather than seeing ourselves as inherent inherently worthy of love and respect, we view ourselves through the lens of someone else's judgment, and this makes it more difficult, especially after a breakup, um of a task to really love yourself. And I saw this TikTok that talked about like ego and the soul, and um it said that ego is the part of us that is connected to our external identity, and it's when we are concerned with how others perceive us, and it's how we perceive our like friend circle, and like how we our appearance, and our relationships. And when we let the ego take over, we measure our worth. We often measure our worth based on like external approval. In the context of a breakup, the ego might feel wounded because in a relationship it was essential to our self-image, and the ego often overcomes the greatest thinking time, in a sense, like the loudest voice in our head after our breakup, telling us that to feel worthless and incomplete without being in a relationship. While in contrast, like the soul, for example, like it represents our like true, most deeper, authentic self, and the part of us is that it isn't dependent on external factors for validation. And it often operates like from a place of self-worth, where love is not something we need to learn, but something that we need to, but it's something that we already process. And it does not really measure value based on relationships or circumstances, but instead it sees itself like as a whole, or as a complete. And oftentimes when we recognize or reconnect with the soul, we begin to realize that you know um, as painful a breakup might be, it doesn't really diminish our essence, in a sense, and it's simply just like an opportunity for growth and a chance to heal and just rediscover who we are in a relationship. And oftentimes after a breakup, in my case at least, the ego typically uh, tells us things like, am I, let me pull up my notes really fast. Oftentimes we really blame ourselves, and we always ask ourselves why, and things of that nature. And um, you know, typically in a relationship, our ego uh, it seeks for identity and validation because we often want closure, and we often attach ourselves to this person, this external person, and it's typically shaped from like a personal experience and trauma and fear, and the need to be seen. And in a relationship, like your ego typically like says like this person completed me, and um, um, you associate your ego uh, to something that you have everything to lose. When in reality, if you associate it like to your soul, for example, honestly you really have nothing to lose. And I think, and I read this quote from somewhere, and it said that like because ego clings and possesses onto people and experiences, but the soul knows nothing is bound to another thing, and everything is just temporary, and it's meant to be enjoyed and not controlled. And that the ego seeks to fit within a set of rules, and it seeks familiarity and not growth, while the soul seeks without hesitation, and it acts without fear of not fitting a label. And I think the biggest thing that I gained when I was reading about the ego versus the soul is that ego will always choose comfort, while the soul always will always choose the possibility of the unknown. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, including myself, because sometimes you know, you would choose to be in this comfortability of your sadness instead of, moving on from that process of the unknown. And I think that's the biggest thing a lot of people struggle with, especially nowadays when, people listen to like sad music and stuff like that. But I think what helped me realize, even though it's still a little bit difficult, and I'm also still processing everything, you know. Um, we have to realize that like your ego is it's not something that you should escape from, it's something that you should identify with, and to further understand your own soul. And I think many people don't know themselves that very well, and they only just know the version of themselves they've been told from other people. And there's more to you than you know it, and you just have to really explore that inner wisdom and love. And and typically when a breakup happens, your ego takes it as a direct assault on your identity, and it needs reason and explanation and proof that like of why we mattered. And we oftentimes look at old texts and pictures and like think about old memories. And yes, like there is some, because sometimes it's you miss like that sentimental value, but also it's because it's trying to rebuild a version of ourselves that felt safe when they were around. And typically, your ego doesn't really want to heal. It wants to control that feeling. And once you realize, your soul doesn't really need anyone to complete it because it's already a whole. Typically it views love as something that flows through us and not something that we own, or something that we lose. And um, I read this psychology text that said, your soul says that the connection was real, um, and it served its purpose, and that the pain you feel is something that you just learn, and you are still you even without them. And it doesn't panic or chase or cling onto certain things, and though it does grieve, it grieves with openness. You feel it. It's fully okay to feel your emotions. It's okay to be sad especially when you're going through a relationship and stuff. And it's a difficult thing for us to let go because we're so driven by our ego not to let go, and I think that's a big thing why we are just a little hard on ourselves. And I feel like for most of us, I feel like we live in like this in between, because even recently, like I catch myself, part of me like wants to text them just one last time and um, just like talk to them, stuff like that. And but another part of me, just like wants to sit in that stillness, and like truly let them go. And I think that's just the whole part of the healing process. And it's definitely a slow journey that I am working on. But I think what has helped me was that it said that like, it's not about erasing this ego that you have, but it's more so just recognizing it and just, telling yourself, hey, like I know that I'm feeling this way, but it's okay because, in the end, um, everything will become better. And people say like time heals all. And even though it could be a very slow process, I feel like it truly does get better overall. And even though I feel like a lot of people are tired of hearing that answer, time heals all, but honestly, there is no lie when people say that. And, shifting, from your ego to soul isn't about like, a force or anything like that. It's more so about like awareness. And, it's not something that you should be scared of. And once you recognize that ego, um, you catch yourself spiraling in this like ego loop, and instead of judging yourself for it, you just have to notice it, and I think noticing it is the biggest step to uh go through with this healing process, and you just and typically with our ego, it wants to fix this pain. Typically I catch myself even like, oh, like when am I gonna feel this, like feel better? When am I gonna I typically look for the solution or the end goal of things. I want to feel better, stuff like that, instead of just trying to feel the emotions. And I think the healing journey is a lot of self-discovery, and it involves with reconnecting with our true self. And you know, oftentimes, we often distract ourselves from the void, whether it be um trying to not really think of them, doing things to like try to self improve, or like just like distracting yourself on like healthy or unhealthy. Like I think oftentimes we forget to, you know instead of hiding from it and just trying to like fix ourselves, we forget to just feel those emotions. And I think feeling those emotions make it a lot easier for us to heal through that process. And I think the path towards self love after a breakup, it requires us to like quiet the ego's fear and shame. And this process does take a lot of time. It's still definitely something that I struggle with today. Even though I'm saying this stuff, it's very hard to, it's easier said than done. And while I do catch myself a lot of the times, it requires us that to recognize that like our worth is not tied to another person, or an external validation. And we just have to realize that like we already as a whole are worthy of love and care and from others. And it's definitely hard because you know I often tell myself that like I know that all my friends and family love me, and like I'm worthy of love and stuff like that. But it's difficult because a lot of times they can stem from loneliness, stuff like that. But I feel like over time, as we embrace these lessons of a breakup and move beyond the ego's need for, validation externally from another person, we can come to love ourselves in a more profound and enduring way. And this self-love isn't um it doesn't need anyone else's approval. I feel like it's just like deep rooted knowledge that, we are simply worthy simply because we exist. And I feel like ultimately, self-love after a breakup, it's not about fixing ourselves because I think that was something that I was struggling with because when I was out of a relationship and people were telling me to find self-love, oftentimes uh, I would just find ways to fix myself on how to become a better person and start doing healthier things and or like things of that nature. But instead, it made me realize that like self-love is really just about feeling your emotions and just realizing, your time and your growth and just who we are as a whole and who we are, uh, and that we are all worthy of love. And I feel like I am uh, mumbling a bit, but I feel like in the end, it does get a lot better. And I honestly just like have no more really. I don't really have that much things to say left, but I think the biggest thing was, you know, healing from a breakup is um, it's it's just like letting go of your ego's attachment to that external validation, and just learning to embrace the soul's understanding of self-worth. And it's the process of just like reprogramming your thoughts, um, and just letting go of that shame from why you hate yourself and allowing like your soul to lead you to a place of unconditional self-love and acceptance. And you know, I think that's just what has helped me a lot. And even though I still sometimes struggle with it, in the end, I feel like it does get better. And yeah, um, I honestly have no more much to say, but yeah.